Hey, welcome back to Generational Gains with my son, Carson Herline, and myself, Greg Herline. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that comes up all of the time. I can't tell you, this is probably one of the most talked about subjects, LLCs. We're going to talk about businesses and LLCs, why to have them, when to have them, what to use them for, as well as living trusts and wills, which is another hot topic. In particular, but LLCs, I would say, is one of the main conversations that comes up all of the time.
Yeah.
In fact, I think people think when they think of LLCs, they think of like, that's the first thing I have to do. So we're going to share with you, and obviously, as always, consult your own CPA and your attorney and decide what's the right thing for you and your situation.
Yep.
We're going to share with you what we've learned and what we're doing for us.
Yeah.
Both of us. We both have different things set up for our businesses, also for trust purposes. I think I've got set up. Maybe I don't think you've set up your trust yet, but we're going to talk about why and when to have that as well. And so to get started, let's talk about LLCs. Mm-hmm. Why, in particular, right? There's S Corps and C Corps. Not going to get in that today. One of the hottest topics is LLCs.
Yeah.
So, Carson, you set up an LLC. Well, why did you set up an LLC?
Well, obviously there's a few reasons why you want entities to be a part of your business, mainly for asset protection. You want some tax help. You want to just kind of protect your business in a way, and that's why you set up an LLC. But I think the first LLC I set up was just a couple of years ago when I wanted to invest in my first real estate deal. So instead of me personally buying the property, owning the property, have all the liability of the property on my name, I set it up under an LLC. So now my LLC owns the property, manages the property, and if the tenant or someone was ever to fall over and want to sue the owner of the home, they would not be suing me. They would be suing this one LLC. And that's the major reason why you have entities, to protect yourself from liability and to protect yourself, maybe give you help with the depreciation and taxes as well. But that was the first LLC I set up, and now we've got tons. But that's the main reason to start.
So let's just stop right there.
Yeah.
First and foremost, one of the biggest reasons why people create LLCs is for liability protection. So I'm going to break it down a little bit differently. Same thing he said, but members are the owners of the LLC.
Yep.
And the reason why people love it, just like Carson just said, is typically it's very hard for the liability of a business issue to bleed into personal issues. So what does that mean? If there is a slip and fall, if there is a bankruptcy associated to that LLC, it should not, in most cases, bleed over into personally. So that is a great reason for liability to create an LLC for your business.
Yeah.
So go ahead. So why else do you have an LLC?
Well, anytime I separate different business transactions or get a new property, a new partner, a different business plan, you have to separate it because there's also certain ways that the IRS wants to look at it. They want to look at these LLCs and they want to know what these expenses are for, why you're writing these things off, how it pertains to building the business. And so every time there's a new business venture, you have to be separating these things out if you want to have clean books and be prepared with the IRS too, which is a massive part about setting up entities.
Perfect. So division of having multiple LLCs works for sometimes different kinds of assets, as well as for different partnerships. And I think that's a common thing. That's why I think so many people have so many LLCs in the real estate world, because they might have more passive real estate. I know you have a passive LLC, you do, and so do I, for real estate. And then you have more active real estate LLC. And then you have different partners on different LLCs.
Yep. So we were actually just talking about this before this. We were talking about, I was to explain to him my setup and how my entities are built.
Yeah, explain that to everyone.
And so, it kind of bleeds into this. So Anna and I are at the top. We are only wanting to be paid, and we want to be looked at by the IRS as real estate investors. Not as an infinite banking teacher, not as a business owner. I want to be looked at by the IRS as a real estate investor.
Well, and you are a real estate investor.
You're correct, yeah. But I want that to be the main thing because that's how I can get all the depreciation on the properties. If I'm an insurance agent and I don't spend time on real estate, but I all of a sudden buy 2 properties and I think I can depreciate all these properties, but that's not my income, usually the IRS doesn't like that.
So I'm going to interrupt you on this. This is a big deal. Well, and I think some people don't understand this. He's talking about depreciation and bonus depreciation that you can take up front. To get that, one of the qualifications is you have to be a real estate professional.
Yep.
And what is a real estate professional? Somebody that spends at least 1,000 hours a year in real estate. So you can be a full-time orthodontist or insurance agent or whatever you are, but you also have to spend 1,000 hours or more on real estate.
And whatever that means for you, 1,000 hours. So there's no line for that. It's a little bit of a gray area. But that's the main point, is I want to be looked at as a real estate professional so I can get all the depreciation on my properties. So I have me and Anna that are being paid a W-2 from our holding companies. We have 2 holding companies. One is an active holding company. I think it's actually an S Corp. And one is a passive holding company. The reason you separate them is because if I'm going to lend money to a real estate investor and get a monthly return, but I'm not actually at the property doing any work, I don't do anything except accept the cash, I'm just a lender, that's not the same thing as if I went and flipped the property myself. They're 2 separate types of real estate deals, and so you have to separate them. So I have an active holding company for all my active business income, and then I have a passive holding company for all my passive income. Any investments in syndications, any long-term rentals that I buy and just cash flow, they're separated. So under now these 2 holding companies, under the passive, any rental property I have is under a different LLC per state that it's in. And then I have another couple entities for any syndications I want to invest in or things like that. All the income from these investments then flow up to my passive holding company and then pays us. All the expenses within those LLCs are also written off. So I only get a net profit that gets paid back to me. Same with the active. Active holding company owns multiple LLCs that do different things. I have income that goes back to that holding company and gets paid back to us in a W-2.
And so one of the reasons why you have different entities as well that he just explained is those passive investments typically have less liability. If they were all grouped up into one LLC, the liability that is all in that same LLC can bleed over into different asset classes, because that LLC could own, if you didn't do it the way he said, all your passive and active investments. So it's good to separate them to have additional coverage or protection when it comes to these different assets.
And my thought with that is, why do people want to separate those things? At what point do they want to separate those things? If you buy 1 rental property, 2 properties, doesn't really matter. Probably not. But if you have 10 properties in 3 states, okay, now you're starting to look at wanting to separate these things out, maybe having another company that's involved owning them. But at what point do you think you're adding multiple entities?
Look, I think this is something that you speak with your own CPA or attorney about this from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
For me personally, it was kind of around 5. Once I had like 4 or 5 assets in a particular state, and then I was starting in a different state, I'd have a different LLC. You can kind of ebb and flow with that, kind of what makes you comfortable. But if you got 50 properties that are all passive or active, you can, in one state, you can have them all in the same LLC.
Yeah.
I think some people get overly incorporated because they're like, I need an LLC for every asset. Now, I would say that I do have LLCs, specific LLCs for single purpose entities for assets that is an apartment complex.
Yeah.
Or something that has multifamily. If there's 150 units, I have an LLC just for that complex because there's potentially a little more liability with that.
Yeah. Whereas 5 small single-family homes in Alabama, you don't need to have 5 different entities.
That's right.
But we also can take a step back with that and say, okay, well, when do you need the first LLC? When do you need an entity?
So I think this is the funny one. I think you and I talked about for a minute. I think one of the things that, this is my personal opinion, one of the things that I see people do is they go to an event or they read a book or they're online, they're going to be real estate investors. And
they're all jacked up on it.
And so the first thing I see people do is like, okay, I'm going to be a real estate investor. So I need to get my real estate license and I need to get an LLC. The first 2 things, both cost money and time. My recommendation is get your feet wet, meaning don't be a realtor yet. Hire someone to be a realtor. There's probably 1 million people that that are realtors right now that you can use to do some homework for you on real estate transactions. I've never had my real estate license, ever. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of transactions, but I've had a realtor that has represented me. So you don't necessarily have to have that. Same with LLCs. Do a deal. And if you're about to close on a deal, your first deal, maybe create your LLC then. So do all your due diligence. Don't create the LLC necessarily yet. Get it under contract. Have some time for due diligence.
Yeah.
Then you have the option to transfer that, as long as you put it in the contract, to allow yourself to transfer as the buyer of that asset from your personal name to the LLC name. That gives you plenty of time. You can create an LLC within 20, 40, 48 hours. We have lots of contacts and relationships to help you set up an LLC. If you're listening to this and you want an LLC, DM us or contact us. I've got contacts for you.
Yeah.
So that is, I would say, once you have your first deal under contract, then do it. Don't go out and spend too much time, because that's not the fancy part of having a business. The fancy part is actually finding the asset or finding the business.
But some people think it is. Like, I'll be on the phone with someone and they're like, yeah,
I'm a business owner.
I'm a business owner. I'm like, oh, what's your business? He's like, I don't have anything yet.
I got ideas.
I got an EIN number. I got an LLC. And now my next step is to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what's the point of setting that all up? Like, who cares?
And look, this does work for some people. So I don't want to say it doesn't work for everybody. But if you know you're going to set up a business and it's going to be successful, go ahead and do it. I just recommend be a little slow to spend too much money, because in the beginning there's a lot of expenses. So one other thing I was going to say, and you brought this up actually before we started, was the importance of really naming your LLC. I made this mistake. I think one of the first things people do when they create their business is like, I'm going to create an LLC and it's going to be Herleen Investments, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if that's the smartest thing. In fact, it's not the smartest thing. Or Herleen Family, whatever. What would be more smart, smarter, would be to say, I'm going to create an entity that's called XYZ Playa LLC. What does that mean? You have no idea.
Yeah.
You don't know who the owners are. Most likely you don't know who the managers are. But once you put your name out there, if you're looking for people when there's a potential problem, it's so much easier for them to hire an attorney and to find out maybe who is the owner. So I would also say, don't be rushed to put your name on the name of an LLC.
Yeah.
And then also, you don't have to be the manager of it. And there's certain states where the manager is not public. All those little things make a big difference if you're trying to really protect those assets and keep people. And right now, it just feels like almost every corner and every billboard, there's an attorney. Everywhere you turn, it's all about attorneys. They're out. There's a purpose for them. They're not all bad, but they're also out to find people that have assets when something happens to then go and sue them.
So I was just thinking about what you were saying, and when it comes to the naming of it all and setting up that, a big piece of getting entities is anonymity. It's tax protection, asset protection, great, but anonymity is a big one too. You don't want everyone to know who you are, who owns the property. So when I have a rental property, I don't want my name to be on there at all. Like you said, have a different entity name. But the reason being is I'm going to have another entity own my portion or my membership in this LLC, so that if someone wants to buy the property off me and they look up my name or the address online, at the property, at the city count, what's it called?
The recorder.
The recorder, and they see an entity, and then they see an owner, which is a different entity, they can't find me. They have no idea who I am. They're not going to call and try and buy the house off me or mess with me at all. No one knows. So anonymity is also a big reason why people set up entities too. And that's why everyone likes Wyoming LLCs. Because Wyoming LLCs in Wyoming, no one knows the owner name. It's not public, which is specific towards Wyoming LLCs, which is why everyone wants a Wyoming LLC to own their membership in these properties so no one can find them.
Yeah, I mean, so those are the main, there's lots of benefits of having an LLC, but I would say you absolutely should have an LLC as you acquire assets or start a business.
Yeah.
From a liability perspective, protecting your personal assets is critical. For a tax perspective, being able to write all your business expenses off, it's incredible. And then for not knowing, for protection from others, the credibility I think is great. And also, like, if you are starting a business and you don't have a business name, it just feels kind of young, immature. Like, so you want to have a name of a company when you pass out a business card. It gives you credibility as well. So those few little handful of things I think are important when you start a business. And I think, almost everyone, I feel like most of the people I work with are entrepreneurs. That's why they self-direct. It's why they're, in the real estate world. And so if you're listening to this, most likely you're an entrepreneur and you've got some kind of business. It makes sense for for you to have an LLC. And it could make sense for you to have multiple LLCs. They're not very expensive to start. They're not very expensive to administer every single year, but the benefits of it are great.
Yeah. So now we've hit LLCs. I think there's an extra layer of this that's important is the trusts. What type of trust to own, why trusts are important, and how the estate planning comes into play. And I don't personally have a trust. So my first question for you is going to be, when should I set up a trust?
So a trust, my attorneys described, I think most people make the mistake of not setting up a trust because when you hear trust, you think you have to be worth millions and millions of dollars. That's when I want to set up a trust. That's not the time to really set up a trust. The time to set up a trust is when you own a home and or have kids or assets. Any one of those three, not all three. If you have kids.
So you think I set up a trust in the next 5 years?
I think you set up a trust in the next 6 months.
Really?
Absolutely, because you have assets.
Interesting.
And so what happens if you don't have a trust? So some people have a will. Let me just describe a little bit of the difference.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not an attorney, so I'm sure I'm missing some things here. But I've been working on my estate since I was 25 years old. And since you're doing everything faster than me, you should have it by 22 or 23.
Yeah.
So that being said, a will is something that basically tells the beneficiaries or the estate when I pass away what happens to my assets.
Yeah.
But what it doesn't do, it doesn't protect the assets from probate. What probate is basically, if you want to avoid probate is when basically when you pass away, if you don't have a trust, then the assets go in front of a judge. Mm-hmm. And the judge and anyone that says that they are owed money from you can come and show up and say, oh no, I should get some of those assets. Or you know what, I'm a kid, a long lost kid, I should get some of those assets. And those assets are not protected from probate. There's probate taxes and probate expenses. So it's probate is the worst thing that something can happen. So if you and Anna were to die and you have these assets, but you don't have a will or a trust set up, then other people can come in and contest and say, Carson meant to give me some of those assets. Maybe some of your business partners could come in and say that. Oh no, that goes to me. They could fight those things. And probate is expensive. So all of a sudden, you go through probate, and while people are contesting, where the assets should go, it could take 6-12 months before the assets even get to your beneficiaries if you have kids, or where you want the assets to go.
Yeah.
So it's really dangerous. So having a trust is not expensive. It's the same thing. It can cost anywhere from $1,000 in general, maybe up to $2,000 or $3,000. But it's like an LLC. It's absolutely worth it. So let me give an example. Right now, if I were to die, I don't own the assets. Mm-hmm. Most likely, it could be an LLC, but the LLC member, owner, beneficiary is my trust.
And what type of trust is it?
So I have a Nevada onshore trust. What does that mean? It's different than your typical revocable living trust. And I don't want to go into that quite yet, but let's just say I have a regular trust.
Okay.
What would happen is when I die, basically the documents would show that the trust is the beneficiary. Mm-hmm. And then the beneficiaries of the trust are my kids and the wife, right? So the assets automatically, without having to go to court or anyone can contest it, basically say, when I die, Greg doesn't even own it. Mm-hmm. Nothing changes.
Yep.
Absolutely nothing changes. The assets go to the trust and the trust has the beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a trustor, somebody that is in charge of managing the trust. Mm-hmm. So nothing changes. And I think that's one of the most important things. If you and Anna were to die, what happens to your interest in the LLCs?
They say the same because if a trust owned them, but if my LLCs own them.
Right now, it's just you owning your LLC.
Yeah.
So then your partners could say, oh no, that comes to me, I should get more, and it could be a problem. But if the LLC, the owner of the LLC is your trust, is able to pass through to your beneficiaries without any problem. So having a trust, I think, is very critical. Mm-hmm. But also the vesting of the trust. I've seen many, many people create trusts. So they have this family trust, right? But they actually don't change the ownership of the LLC or of the home. So right now, if you were to create a trust, you're in the home that you live in, and you own it, which is mostly the case, you and your spouse own it, and you both pass away, then that house will go into probate. Mm-hmm. Now, it should go quickly, but if you have a kid, but it doesn't necessarily mean it'll go quickly.
Yeah.
If I create the trust and don't move the home, the ownership of the home into the trust, then the trust is of no value. So you could create a trust.
Sure.
But if it just says whatever,
Yeah.
the vesting has to be done correctly.
That makes sense.
So creating a trust is critical. In the will, and also kind of I forget what they call it, but the listing of the personal assets go inside the will. So like a watch or personal facts that aren't titled, personal artifacts, you have those things and you update them and who gets what things. Or there's a schedule of how that works. Like if I die, here's how it works. There's the kids that pick names from a hat and they get first dib, second dib, whatever. Or Jessica could say, hey, look, if we die, the ring goes to so-and-so. It could be, whatever the case is. So having that all written out and spelled out and looked at every year, I think is critical. Most people do it too late, every 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
So what happens is they create it, but then it gets stale. You have new assets. You don't put those assets inside the trust. You die. Those assets that are not in the trust go through probate. Anything inside the trust is avoided by probate.
Yep.
So this is why you need it today. And so that's a typical family revocable trust.
So even though I'm 21, you would say get one now.
Well, you have assets.
Sure, but young enough where obviously hopefully nothing happens. So you still think I would need it as soon as possible?
You should have a trust.
Yeah.
And you should be using it now.
Yeah.
And so having a trust, if you have assets or kids, the kids are important because inside of a trust, the kids also talks about who is the guardianship of the kids. So if something were to happen to you, where do the kids go if they're minors?
Yeah.
That's critical as well. And so
that makes sense.
That part you don't necessarily need today.
Sure.
Because you don't have kids yet.
Yeah.
Now there's something called an onshore trust, a Nevada onshore trust. The reason why I set that up years and years and years ago is basically it protects me from a lot more liability. Once an asset is put into a Nevada onshore trust, those assets, after they've been in there for 2 years, are protected from almost anything. Lawsuits, etc. They're protected from bankruptcy if they're in there for more than 7 years. So there's a lot of additional credibility, or I should say less liability in assets that you put into a Nevada onshore trust. They're more expensive. There's more benefits than I just said. But what I heard when my attorney explained it to me is you get this, you get the assets in there, and once they're in that trust and they've been in there for a few years, they're protected from others coming in and taking them.
Yeah.
And so there's multiple reasons for having trust. One is to make sure that it doesn't go through probate and then some random person doesn't come up and be like, hey, look, I mean, a good example, and not to pick on it, but right now is like, let's say that I pass away and I don't update my trust, and your mom passes away and Jessica passes away. Well, Chris, again, I like Chris,
Yeah.
but Chris can be like, hey, look, I'm supposed to get that because Christy passed away.
Yeah.
Now that goes to court.
Yeah.
And they find out and they fight it, and that kind of a thing. Now I know that wouldn't happen, and this is nothing against him, but that's probably a good example of someone coming in, a family member, or someone who married into the family, right? It's all of a sudden that you pass away, and then again, I'll pick on Anna, oh no, I was supposed to get that. Well, it doesn't say if you are or aren't. So now we got to go to court.
Yeah.
And so this is why you want to have a trust to spell out all of these different things, so people can't come in and say, hey, no, I should get some of that inheritance. That's why it's really important.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's good to know.
Yeah, so I think as individuals, if you're listening to this, if you have one of those things, again, contact us. We can introduce you to different companies that are really good at creating trust for you in your state, wherever you might be. You might have an attorney. Absolutely should talk to them about getting a trust. Usually in a trust package, you get the guardianship for the children, you get the will, you get to list out all the assets that go to specific people. It might sound morbid, but I can tell you, I've been involved. When I say involved, I've seen many people in my years pass away. Investors, people that have lived a long life, and when someone passes away, weird things happen. All of a sudden, people you think are close to you are all of a sudden fighting about different monies. And then the last thing I'll say that on the living trust thing, I think is an important one is don't do anything for a year. What does that mean? If I were to die today, and Jessica were to die, and you were to get an inheritance check, let's say of X amount of dollars.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things mistakes people make after there's a decease is making big decisions with money. One of the best pieces of advice that I hope I've never told you is wait a year. If you were ever to get a big lump sum of money, you win the lottery, or I pass away and it says you get X amount of dollars, do nothing for a year. Why? In the first year, you typically don't know what to do with that kind of money.
Yeah.
And also you're going to get hit up by lots of people. Hey, how about invest in this? How about invest in this? Move into a new big house.
Yeah.
Don't make any big financial decisions in the first year. If you let a whole year go by with the money in your account, or at least available, you will then be more responsible with that money and not lose it. I see too many people get it in the first year, spend it, and it's gone.
Yeah.
Invest in all these new business ideas. So anyways, living trust, probate, death, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
Be prepared. The more prepared you are, the better you'll live and the more comfortable you'll be. So, as we talk about LLCs, is there any kind of final, I spoke more on the living trust and wills because I have one.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to share on the LLCs as we wrap up?
I think for me, I would just focus on trying to build a business first before getting into any of this stuff. Like if you're at a point right now where you aren't sure what any of this really means, or you're looking to start a business and get into all of this, don't worry about it. Like just start your business and start working on the things you want to work on and start making money, and then start looking into these things. So that's what I would advise everyone as well.
So let's wrap up today. Let's just share one of the sweets that happened in the last week. So give me a sweet in the last week that you had.
What's a good sweet for you? Do you have one? Let me think.
Yeah.
Go for it first.
Summer turned 1.
Yeah.
And we had a big birthday. I would say it went off really well. Summer, the only time she cried during the whole birthday was when the cake came out. Besides the cake, she had the best time with family and friends. And so it was really fun to celebrate her 1-year-old with you and the rest of the family.
Yeah, that was really fun. And it reminds me of my sweet for the past week. Anna and I went and bought some surfboards. So this whole week we've been like fixing them up, and I'm excited to use them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, good. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you're in the business. You've got an LLC if you're in a business. And if you're going to start a business, as you get going, definitely make sure you have an LLC to protect yourself, and for credibility reasons, for tax reasons. It is a very important thing as you grow and scale.
Thank you, guys.